Hey everyone, I've got an amazing story to share today that just might shift your perspectives on spirituality and faith. Let's dive into the incredible journey of Khalid Nasir, a young Muslim whose life took a remarkable turn after a near-death experience where he encountered Jesus. You'll definitely want to stick around for all the captivating details. Before we jump in, why not drop a comment and let us know where you're tuned in from? And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to do that and hit the notification bell so you can catch all the future stories that will surprise you. Hello, I'm Khalid Nasir, currently 43 years old, and I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. It's interesting. Nashville has such a vibrant and diverse community, but I was raised in a home steeped in the Islamic faith. From an early age, my family held a strong conviction that the Quran contained the ultimate truth, and that following Islam was the only way to find salvation. My parents, Hassan and Amina, were pretty adamant about upholding all the principles of our faith. We performed our 5 daily prayers, fasted during Ramadan, and spent Fridays at the mosque. It wasn't just a set of practices, it was woven into our very identity and lifestyle. In my upbringing, questioning our beliefs wasn't merely discouraged, it was almost unthinkable. Doubting Islam felt like I was betraying not just my religion, but also my family and the close-knit community we were part of. I remember being a teenager and occasionally wrestling with doubts. Whenever I tried to bring these thoughts up, my dad would look serious and firmly say, "Khalid, those questions come from Shaitan. You need to cast those thoughts aside." I respected him deeply, so I just pushed those questions away, hoping to avoid disappointing him. Then came college, and everything shifted. Suddenly, I was surrounded by a whirlwind of ideas and beliefs, far removed from what I had always known. It felt like I had stepped from a black and white world into a vibrant, colorful one. Amid this new landscape, I met Ethan Clark, an Orthodox Christian who quickly became my friend. Initially, I was determined to convince him that Islam was the one true faith, but Ethan surprised me. He listened intently, responding with respect rather than judgment, never trying to push his beliefs onto me. Through his friendship, I found myself questioning long-held beliefs. I started exploring the Bible on my own, eager to understand perspectives I had never considered. It was a transformative time, filled with curiosity and unexpected revelations. While Ethan was deep in thought about his beliefs, I found myself immersed in the pages of the Quran, yearning for answers to the swirling questions forming in my mind. It was a confusing time. I loved my family and community dearly, but at the same time, I felt this insatiable curiosity, a strong need to delve into the mysteries of faith and the world around me. Amidst all this introspection, something extraordinary occurred that shifted my entire perspective. I experienced a moment that felt like brushing against death, an event that rattled my existing beliefs and forced me to reevaluate everything I held as true. Before diving into that pivotal moment, let me clarify one thing. I wasn't anything special, just a regular young man named Khalid, grappling with my uncertainties, fears, and aspirations. It was in my ordinary existence that I encountered something I had never thought was possible. On an otherwise typical day, I was strolling home from class, my mind buzzing with recent readings, some passages from the Bible that Hassan had shared with me, alongside verses from the Quran that I was reconsidering with fresh perspective. I was so engrossed in my thoughts that, for a moment, I didn't even register the signs my body was sending me. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a stab of pain coursed through my chest, as if someone had taken hold of my heart and was squeezing it tightly. Initially, I brushed it off as mere fatigue or perhaps a bit of indigestion, but the discomfort only intensified. My breaths became shallow, each one more laborious than the last, as if an unseen force was crushing my lungs. In a frantic rush, I glanced around, hoping to find someone to help, but the street was eerily quiet and deserted. Just as panic began to creep in, my legs buckled and I collapsed. The last image I remember before everything went dark was of the clear blue sky above me. Time was a blur during those moments. Suddenly, I felt as if I was floating. It's hard to describe, but it was as if I had detached from my body, able to look down at myself lying there on the sidewalk, lifeless. I watched as people rushed toward me, one calling for an ambulance, while everything unfolded in a surreal slow motion. The next scene shifted to an emergency room where the rush of doctors and nurses filled the space. Their voices were urgent, yet they felt muffled, like echoes underwater. I could make out my own body on the gurney, pale and still, as they frantically worked to bring me back. And then, chilling me to my core, I heard a doctor say something that would haunt me. "We have no pulse." I was in a really bizarre situation, clinically dead. It felt surreal. Inside, I wished I could scream, to let everyone know that I was still there, that I could see and hear everything happening around me. But words wouldn't come. Then, something even more astonishing took place. I sensed this sensation of being lifted away from that hospital, like I was being drawn upward into another realm. The light surrounding me was something else entirely. It wasn't harsh or blinding. Instead, it was a gentle, warm glow that felt like a comforting embrace. As I moved toward this radiant light, an unprecedented calm enveloped me. All those burdens I had, my anxieties about family, faith, and what the future held, just melted away. For the first time, I truly felt at peace, as if I had finally returned home. And then there he was. In the heart of that brilliant light stood Jesus, not the figure from a church painting or history book, but a living presence, vibrant and full of life. When he smiled at me, I felt this profound love, unconditional and deep. It was so intense that I felt completely naked, yet utterly accepted all at once. He didn't use words I could hear, but somehow I understood him completely. His essence seemed to say, "Khalid, I've always been here waiting for you." In that moment, all my doubts and questions about faith felt trivial, insignificant. I was confronted with nothing less than absolute truth and love, and in that presence, everything else faded into the background. I wanted to linger in that blissful light forever, but then I felt a gentle nudge, almost like a father waking a child from sleep. Jesus let me know it wasn't my time yet, and that I had a purpose to fulfill back on earth. Before I could even respond, I felt this pull, falling back into my body. The light receded, and that serene feeling started to fade. Suddenly, my eyes flew open, and there I was, back in the emergency room, gasping for breath, confusion swirling around me. The doctor looked just as astonished as I felt, and I heard someone exclaim, "It's a miracle. He's back." And truly, it was a miracle. I had experienced death and returned to life, but more than that, I had received insights that would alter the trajectory of my life. It led me to reconsider everything I thought I knew about God, faith, and my purpose here on earth. In the days that followed my near-death experience, let me tell you, things were nothing short of surreal. I spent a week in the hospital, surrounded by doctors who were equally bewildered by my situation. They scratched their heads over how my heart had ceased to beat for 5 whole minutes. Yet here I was, alive without any explanation. Lying in that hospital bed, my mind was a whirlwind. The journey I had just gone through played on repeat, floating above my body, the bright light that enveloped me, and the profound moment when I met Jesus. Each time I shut my eyes, his face was there, vivid and reassuring, almost as if that light had attached itself to me, filling my heart with warmth. My family never left my side. They were my anchors during this tumultuous time. My father, Khalid, gripped my hand with a mix of fear and hope. I could sense he was terrified of losing me again if he let go. Amina, my mother, was a mosaic of relief and gratitude. Tears of joy mingled with her prayers to Allah. They were celebrating my survival, yet an unspoken worry lingered in the air, as if they sensed I had returned changed in ways they didn't fully understand. There was so much I longed to share about my experience and my encounter with Jesus, but every attempt felt like trying to catch smoke with bare hands. How do you articulate something so vast, so life-altering, with mere words? And then there was the nagging fear of how my deeply religious parents would react to this revelation. Their son, who had embraced his Muslim upbringing, now had experienced something with Jesus, so I held back. For the initial days, I let them misinterpret my silence as fatigue or contemplation of what I had been through. Internally, though, I was wrestling with everything I believed. It wasn't simply about choosing Islam or Christianity. It felt far more profound, like I had glimpsed an absolute truth that transcended all faiths. When night fell and the hospital room darkened, my prayers transformed. They weren't the scripted recitations from my childhood. Instead, they became intimate conversations with God, with Jesus himself. I found myself asking questions about why I was chosen and how I should navigate my new understanding. One particular night, deep in thought, a nurse entered my room. She must have sensed my turmoil because she took a seat beside my bed and quietly asked how I was feeling. Before I could think twice, my story poured out. I recounted the light, the emotions, and my meeting with Jesus. I braced myself for skepticism or worse, ridicule, but what I received in return was compassion and understanding. She held my hand gently and shared that her sister had experienced something similar many years ago. "These experiences change people," she reassured me. "Don't rush to make sense of it all. Allow it time." Her words acted like a soothing balm on my chaotic thoughts. For the first time since my awakening, I felt a flicker of hope in the uncertainty that enveloped me. I soon realized that I wasn't alone in my experience. There were others who had glimpsed what lay beyond this life. Over the next few days, I dove into researching near-death experiences. Whenever I found myself by myself, I would sneakily pull out the phone my parents had given me, shielding the screen whenever someone else entered the room. The stories I read came from diverse people across various cultures and beliefs, many describing moments eerily similar to mine: an overwhelming light, a profound sense of peace, encounters with divine beings. These themes kept emerging, and as I absorbed more of those accounts, certainty settled within me. I had not just imagined it. It wasn't just a fanciful hallucination induced by oxygen deprivation, as some skeptics might argue. This was a true encounter, a glimpse at something far greater than everyday existence. But with that awareness came a newfound weight. I felt this sense of duty. After witnessing the afterlife, there had to be a reason behind it. I could not simply return to my previous life as if nothing had changed. I was different now, and figuring out how to navigate this new reality was imperative. When I finally stepped out of the hospital, I wasn't just another man who had overcome a heart attack. I had experienced death and was given a chance to start anew. Everything appeared transformed, the colors brighter, the sounds crisper, like I was seeing the world through a fresh lens for the very first time. I anticipated a challenging path ahead, facing my family's inquiries and the expectations of those around me. However, I held on to the comforting belief that I wasn't facing this journey alone. The warmth and illumination I had felt in the presence of Jesus remained with me, guiding me forward. Returning home felt oddly surreal. It was a familiar space. The walls of my house in Nashville, the furniture, and the family photographs looked just as they had when I left weeks earlier. Yet, I was no longer Khalid. The change within me was significant. Initially, my parents were just overjoyed to have me back, and they hardly recognized the difference in my demeanor. Or maybe they noticed it, but chose to attribute it to the trauma I had endured. My mother Amina busied herself in the kitchen, making my favorite meals, while my father Hassan often sat with me in silence or shared stories from my childhood. But as the days slipped by, it became increasingly clear that this journey I was on had only just begun. It was hard to conceal the inner chaos within me. I found myself lost in thought, fixated on the prayer rug tucked away in the corner of my bedroom. Guilt and confusion swirled together in my mind like an angry storm. Those 5 daily prayers, which used to form the backbone of my life, now felt strange. It wasn't that I had lost the desire to pray. Rather, my entire understanding of what prayer meant had shifted dramatically. One afternoon, while I relaxed in the backyard, my father came out to join me. He studied me for a long moment before breaking the silence. "Khalid," he said, his voice rumbling with concern, "what's happening to you, my son? You haven't been going to the mosque, your prayers." I had anticipated this moment, but no amount of preparation could ready me for how to articulate what I was feeling. How could I communicate something that even I was struggling to grasp? Taking a deep breath, I started to share my thoughts. I talked about the light that filled me, the peace I hadn't known before, and my experiences with Jesus. As the words spilled out, I noticed my father's expression shift from worry to shock and then something that resembled fear. When I finished, a heavy silence hung between us. He looked down, his hands tightly intertwined. Finally, almost in a whisper, he said, "May Allah protect us." When he met my gaze, I spotted tears lingering in his eyes. Khalid, my son, you've been misled by Shaitan. These visions, they can't be real. I had anticipated his reaction, yet it still stung. Dad, I replied, I know this is tough to accept, but I lived it. It was more real than anything I've ever known. He stood up suddenly, an abrupt gesture filled with urgency. I don't want to hear any more about this. We need to call Imam Hassan. He'll know what to do. In the days that followed, our house felt like a battleground cloaked in silence. I would catch glimpses of my mother silently crying when she thought I wasn't watching. Meanwhile, my father spent countless hours on the phone, his conversations low and cautious as he reached out to community leaders. As time wore on, I felt an ever-growing sense of isolation. Then, Imam Hassan paid us a visit. I had always admired him for his wisdom and kindness, but when he insisted that my experience was nothing more than an illusion or temptation, I sensed an unbridgeable chasm between us. It was during this turbulent period that I found solace with Ethan. He was the only person I felt comfortable confiding in about my experiences. Although he practiced Christianity, he never pressured me or sought to convert me. He simply lent an ear, offering understanding and insights that helped me sort through the chaos in my mind. One night, we found ourselves on campus, discussing everything that had happened, the moonlight casting a gentle glow around us as the conversation flowed. Ethan once shared something with me that really resonated. Sometimes, Khalid, we find ourselves redirected from the paths we're accustomed to in order to discover something even greater. It's not just about shifting one's faith, it's about nurturing a deeper bond with the divine. His words helped me see things differently. I realized I wasn't turning my back on my roots or my upbringing. Instead, I was broadening my understanding of the divine. But, I kept thinking, how am I supposed to explain this to my family and the people in my community? The unease in my home was on the rise. I could sense the glances from neighbors as I stepped outside. The familiar chatter in the mosque, where I used to feel at home, now felt heavy with whispers. Those who had known me since childhood suddenly regarded me like I was a stranger. One evening, after a particularly intense discussion with my father, I decided to take a stroll to clear my mind. As I walked through the streets of Nashville, it hit me. I was at a crossroads. I had two options: either suppress everything I had felt and return to my old life, making everyone else comfortable, or embrace my truth, even if it meant risking alienation from my loved ones. It was a tough choice, but in my heart, I understood which direction felt right. I could not ignore my experiences. I couldn't pretend that I hadn't seen what I saw or felt what I felt. So I returned home, resolved to be honest, no matter the outcome. My love for my family and my community was strong, but my commitment to the truth I had uncovered was stronger. I knew the road ahead would not be easy, yet I felt a comforting presence guiding me. The light I had encountered and the love I had felt were with me, and that gave me the strength to face whatever was to come. When I finally decided to reveal my near-death experience and my encounter with Jesus, I anticipated the fallout, but that didn't make it any less painful. The pivotal moment arrived on a Friday, when our family traditionally came together for prayer and a meal. The atmosphere that evening was thick with tension. My father barely touched his food, and my mother seemed uncharacteristically quiet. I realized it was time to address everything. After we finished eating, I mustered my courage and said, "Dad, Mom, we need to discuss what happened to me in the hospital, what I saw." My father interrupted me, his emotion palpable as he raised his hand. "Khalid," he said, his voice trembling, "think carefully about what you're about to say. Consider your family and your community." Taking a deep breath, I replied, "I'm speaking out of respect for you both. What I experienced was genuine. I saw Jesus, and I felt his love." It all changed for me in a matter of moments, setting off a whirlwind of emotions. My father was the first to react, shouting accusations at me. He claimed I had been misled, that I had betrayed my family and my faith. Meanwhile, my mother sat there, tears streaming down her face and hitting the table with a soft thud. I attempted to clarify that my intention wasn't to reject Islam. Rather, I wanted to share an experience that had deepened my understanding of God. Unfortunately, my explanations felt pointless, as if they were falling on deaf ears. As the night dragged on, the argument escalated. One particular statement from my father hit me hard. He warned that if I persisted in this madness, there would no longer be room for me in our home. Those words landed like a blow to the gut. I had anticipated backlash, but I never thought it would reach such a breaking point. I glanced over at my mother, searching for any sign of support, but she glanced away, unable to confront the situation. Sleep eluded me that night as I lay awake, replaying the exchange in my head and questioning whether I had made the right choice. Every time doubt crept in, I recalled the warmth and love I had experienced in the presence of Jesus, reminding me that I couldn't turn my back on that truth. When morning arrived, the atmosphere in the house felt icy. My father wouldn't even look at me, and my mother avoided making eye contact. I confined myself to my room, lost in thought and trying to process everything that had unraveled. During that time, I received a message from Ethan, checking in to see if I was all right. I decided I couldn't bear the heavy silence at home any longer, so I headed out to meet him. We chose a cafe near the college, and the moment Ethan saw me, he sensed something was off. I unloaded everything on him, pouring out the events of the last few days. He listened intently, offering kind words of comfort. "Tariq," he said once I paused, "you're going through an incredibly tough time, but keep in mind, you're not alone on this journey." His support bolstered my spirits, but also highlighted the seriousness of my situation. I was on the brink of losing my family, my community, everything that had been a part of my life. The following days only compounded the tension at home. My father continued to refuse to speak to me directly, choosing instead to communicate through my mother, which was almost worse. I overheard hushed talks about consulting a religious figure to cast out what they believed to be evil spirits. It pained me to think my experience was being labeled as something sinister. The news of my struggles rapidly spread through our community. Friends I had known since childhood began to look at me with either suspicion or pity. Some attempted to bring me back to what they considered the right path, while others simply turned their backs. The loneliness was suffocating. A week after that pivotal conversation on Friday, my father reached out to me. When I saw him, his face looked strained and aged. "I've given this some time," he started. "Are you ready to acknowledge your mistake and come back to our true path?" Looking into the eyes of the man who had always been my hero, I felt a wave of heartbreak wash over me. "Dad," I replied, trying to find the right words, "I love you and I cherish our family and community, but I can't turn my back on what I've experienced and what I know to be true." For a moment, he closed his eyes, as if my words hurt him physically. When he opened them again, there was a chilling detachment I had never witnessed before. "So, this is your decision," he stated. "I cannot have someone who turns away from our faith living in my house. You have until tomorrow to pack your things." The impact of his words struck me like a lightning bolt, expected yet jarring. I glanced over to see my mother standing in the doorway, frozen. She let out a stifled sob before disappearing down the hall. I thought about going after her to offer some comfort, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't ease the tension. That night, while I sorted through my belongings, the reality settled heavily on my chest. I was on the verge of losing my family, my home, everything that felt familiar. Just as fear began to creep in, I stumbled upon an unexpected calmness, something I had felt during a near-death experience. It was as though a gentle voice reassured me, "I am with you." The morning that followed was surreal. I stepped out of the house where I had spent my childhood, carrying a simple backpack filled with clothes and a few personal items. My mother embraced me for a brief moment at the doorway, whispering, "May Allah guide you back to us." Meanwhile, my father watched from the window, his expression a mask of disappointment. As I walked away, the weight of my backpack felt like nothing compared to the heaviness of loss settling in my heart. I understood then that my life would be forever changed. The price for living my truth was steep, far more than I had anticipated. Yet despite the pain, a profound certainty surged within me. I was on the right path. A challenging journey lay ahead, but I wouldn't face it alone. The light I had witnessed and the love I had felt accompanied me. With that conviction, I took my first steps into an uncertain future, filled with potential and promise. Leaving my childhood home was undoubtedly the hardest moment of my life. Alone with just my backpack, I wandered through the streets of Nashville, Places that once felt warm and inviting now appeared foreign and unwelcoming. It was Ethan who... When I first reached out to Ethan, explaining everything that had happened to me, he immediately offered to help. "You can crash on my couch for as long as you need," he said. His kindness truly touched me. My initial days in Ethan's home were a roller coaster of feelings. On one hand, I felt a wave of relief. I no longer had to conceal my true self or the things I had gone through. On the other hand, there were heavy moments filled with sadness and uncertainty. I often found myself anxiously waiting for my parents to call and tell me it was all just a mistake, but that call never came. Ethan and his family welcomed me with open arms. They didn't push their beliefs on me or try to change who I was. Instead, they provided a safe haven, a space where I could just be and begin to process everything I was going through. Ethan's mother, a wonderful woman named Aisha, would often find me awake during the late hours and sit with me. Sometimes we'd sit in silence, other times she'd offer comfort. One night, during one of those quiet conversations, Aisha shared something that resonated with me. "Khalid, sometimes God takes us down tough roads, not to punish us, but to prepare us for greater things." Her words opened my eyes. I started viewing my situation as more than just a loss. It became clear that this was a chance to engage with my faith on a deeper, more personal level, free from the weight of expectations and traditions I had known. However, reality hit quickly. I needed to find a job and figure out my living situation. College was secured for now thanks to a scholarship, but I had to tackle other expenses. So I began my search for part-time work. It wasn't a walk in the park. Nashville is a tight-knit community, and I quickly noticed how fast news travels. Many places that would have welcomed me before were now shutting their doors. I could sense the gazes and hear the hushed whispers. "It's that boy Nasir, the one with the strange vision." Eventually, luck was on my side. I landed a job at a bookstore across town. The owner, an elderly gentleman named Mr. Thompson, didn't care about my past. He just wanted someone who knew their way around books and could handle cash. "If you know books and can count, you're in," he declared. The bookstore became my sanctuary. Surrounded by shelves filled with texts from various beliefs and philosophies, I spent my downtime diving into new ideas, many of which I had previously thought were off limits. In those moments, I discovered that I wasn't alone in my experience. People from diverse backgrounds had encountered similar situations, and their stories helped me gain a fresh perspective on my own journey. It was around this time that I decided to start keeping a diary. Initially, I didn't plan to share it with anyone or think about publishing it. I just needed a way to sort through my emotions and thoughts. I began documenting my experiences, the countless doubts, and the agonizing questions that surfaced after losing my family and community. Writing became my refuge, a method to clarify the jumble of feelings swirling inside me. I started noticing patterns and making connections that had previously eluded me. In the midst of all the grief and confusion, I discovered a common thread that guided me through: the quest for truth and the unconditional love I had felt in fleeting moments beyond life itself. Slowly but surely, I began to establish a new support network. Besides Ethan and his family, I connected with others who had met similar challenges. Some were like me, having strayed from their Muslim roots, while others hailed from diverse religious backgrounds. What brought us together was our desire to explore a deeper understanding of the divine, unconfined by organized religion. One significant person I met was Amina. A former Catholic, she had undergone a near-death experience after a serious car accident. Thanks to her, I learned about a support group for those who had gone through similar experiences. Attending these meetups was transformative. For the first time since everything happened, I felt truly understood. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were tough days when the ache of missing my family seemed unbearable. I'd often find myself walking past our old home, wishing to catch a glimpse of my mother tending to the garden or my father washing the car. On those particularly heavy days, the burden of my decisions felt almost too much to bear. One night, during a particularly challenging time, I had a vivid dream. I found myself enveloped in that incredible light from my near-death experience, and there was Jesus, smiling at me. He didn't utter a word but embraced me tightly. Upon waking, my cheeks were damp with tears, yet I felt lighthearted. That dream brought back the reason I had chosen this challenging path. About 6 months after I left my parents' house, I managed to rent a small apartment. It was a humble space, but it was mine. As I moved in and surveyed the empty rooms, a mix of pride and sorrow washed over me. I had begun rebuilding my life, but it came at a steep price. That evening, I found myself sitting on the floor among unpacked boxes, clutching my journal. I penned down, "The journey continues." I had no idea where this path would lead me, but I knew I wasn't alone. The light I had witnessed, the love I had felt, would always be with me, and that realization was enough. The process of reconstructing my life was far from over. The journey ahead was still filled with obstacles and connections that needed to be forged or repaired. However, for the first time in ages, I found a sense of calm regarding the choices I had made. Sure, the route I took wasn't what I'd anticipated, and it certainly wasn't an easy one, but it was mine. I was resolved to follow it, no matter where it led. As time went on and I became more comfortable in Nashville, something surprising started to unfold. My narrative, a tale of a young Muslim man who had faced death and had an encounter with Jesus, began to circulate beyond my small circle. It all kicked off during a support group meeting. I shared my story, and a journalist named Hannah seemed particularly captivated by what I had to say. She asked if she could write about my experience for a local blog. At first, I was hesitant. I had endured so much already, and the thought of laying it all bare for the world to see filled me with anxiety. But deep down, I sensed that sharing could be beneficial, perhaps even uplifting for someone grappling with their own crises of faith. So I went ahead and gave her the green light. A few weeks later, when the article went live, I was blown away by the response. Folks from all over the country began to reach out to me on social media. Some were doubtful, questioning whether my experiences were genuine, while others expressed curiosity and wanted to delve deeper. Then there were those who resonated profoundly with my journey, sharing their own battles with faith and self-identity. One afternoon, a heartfelt message came in from a young man named Samir, who lived in a nearby town. He shared that my story had inspired him to confront his own beliefs for the very first time, stating, "I no longer feel alone on this path." These messages awakened me to the realization that my experience wasn't just a personal saga. It had the power to spark dialogue about faith, spirituality, and the very essence of existence, transcending conventional religious boundaries. Before long, I began receiving requests to speak at various small gatherings and events. Initially, I felt out of my depth. Who was I to discuss such topics? I wasn't a religious figure, nor did I carry the title of an expert. I was simply an average individual attempting to make sense of something extraordinary. Yet, as I began to share, I discovered that this was what resonated with people. I wasn't providing unchanging answers or strict doctrines. Rather, I was simply revealing my truth. I often reflect on my journey, its doubts, struggles, and those moments of clarity that stand out. One day, I found myself asked to speak at an interfaith gathering at a university. It was held in Nashville, Tennessee, and the auditorium was packed. You could really feel the electricity in the air. People from various faiths were present, including many familiar faces from my past community. As I stood there, my voice quivered slightly at first, but as I began to share, a sense of calm enveloped me. I recounted my near-death experience and how meeting Jesus had reshaped my views on spirituality and religion. My intention wasn't to sway anyone's beliefs or claim one faith is superior over another. I simply wanted to convey that there might be more to our spiritual realities than the teachings we've adhered to in our respective religions. When I finished, the room fell silent for a brief moment before a flurry of questions erupted. Some inquiries were charged with hostility, accusing me of turning my back on my faith. However, others were genuinely curious, eager to learn more. What surprised me were those who demonstrated an openness and compassion that I didn't expect. A graceful elderly Muslim woman stood up, sharing that her grandson had gone through a similar ordeal after an accident. She admitted they had silenced him, terrified of community backlash. Her heartfelt words struck me deeply. By opening up about my experience, I was paving the way for others to do the same. I realized I was confronting the taboos prevalent in various religious circles around spiritual experiences that don't conform to conventional narratives. Yet, not everything was rosy. I soon encountered online threats from extremists who cast me as a danger. Some labeled me a Western agent out to undermine the Islamic faith, while others claimed I was possessed. The intensity of those messages frightened me at times, leading me to contemplate stepping away from the public eye and returning to a more private life. But then I remembered the lives my story had touched and the valuable conversations that had ignited. Then came an unexpected call from my mother. She had learned about my talk, and, with her voice trembling, she said, "Khalid, I'm struggling to comprehend what's happened to you. I still pray for Allah's guidance to bring you back, but I must admit, I'm proud of your bravery." Though brief, that conversation felt like a balm for my soul, a glimmer of hope that perhaps one day the bridges that had been strained could find a way to be mended. As my story gained traction, more invitations started pouring in for me to share my experiences. Whenever an opportunity arose, I made it a point to join discussions on radio shows and podcasts. It wasn't about seeking fame. Rather, I felt it was crucial to dive into the tough subjects surrounding belief, spirituality, and our understanding of existence. During one conversation, the host turned to me saying, "Khalid, after everything that's happened in your life, how do you define your faith now?" I paused, considering my words carefully. "You know, my faith feels more like an adventure than a set promise," I finally replied. "It's about embracing the vastness of the divine and recognizing that no single religion holds all the answers. It revolves around love and compassion, along with the ongoing journey for a deeper relationship with the divine, whatever name we might attach to it." As I expressed these ideas, a sense of calm washed over me. It dawned on me that despite the trials and losses, my near-death experience had offered me a remarkable gift: the freedom to explore the divine beyond rigid religious boundaries and the chance to inspire others to do the same. My narrative took on a life of its own, leading me into unexpected conversations about spirituality and near-death experiences. I realized that simply sharing my story wasn't enough. I craved a deeper understanding of it all. I wanted to frame my experiences within a larger tapestry of spiritual and scientific insights. So, I dived into literature on near-death experiences, consciousness, quantum physics, and the study of various religions, spending countless hours in the university library, poring over scholarly and philosophical texts. The more I explored, the more I recognized the intricate and expansive nature of spiritual experiences and human consciousness. Dr. Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, struck a chord with me. His research illustrated that while my experience was uniquely mine, it resonated with many others from diverse backgrounds and cultures. This realization prompted me to ponder, if so many individuals from different walks of life had similar experiences, what insight did that provide us about the essence of reality and consciousness? I found myself particularly fascinated by the parallels drawn between near-death and mystical experiences, as recounted in various faith traditions. The themes of divine light, unconditional love, and an overwhelming sense of unity seem to resonate throughout history and across cultures. It made me reevaluate my own journey and the universal threads linking us all. I started seeing my experiences as part of a broader human journey, rather than something isolated. This curiosity led me to various workshops and conferences focused on consciousness and spirituality. At one memorable gathering, I crossed paths with Dr. Emily Harris, a leading figure in the field of mortality studies. Her discussion on how near-death experiences could profoundly impact our lives struck a chord with me. After her talk, I had a chance to speak with her for a few moments. I shared my own story, and as she listened, her eyes filled with a mix of compassion and excitement. "Khalid," she said, "you've been gifted with something valuable. Use it thoughtfully. Don't focus on proving your perspective or disproving others. Instead, aim to illuminate and foster understanding in the world." Her words resonated deeply and reshaped my outlook on my journey. It wasn't about convincing others of my truth. It was about sharing my experiences to encourage open dialogue and expand our collective understanding of spirituality. My quest for understanding wasn't confined to just the spiritual. I found myself intrigued by where science and spirituality intersected. Research on altered states of consciousness, the impacts of meditation on the brain, and the theories of quantum physics about our reality captivated me. Then, during an online lecture about neuroscience and spiritual experiences, a realization hit me. The speaker mentioned that certain spiritual feelings could be replicated in a lab using brain stimulation. Instantly, a wave of doubt washed over me. Did this mean my own experiences were merely neurological events without any spiritual depth? But then, a different thought emerged. Maybe neuroscience wasn't negating spiritual truths. Perhaps it was revealing the processes that allow us to tap into them. Just as a radio doesn't create music but plays it, maybe our brains are the tools that help us tune into larger spiritual realms. This newfound perspective encouraged me to dive into meditation practices from various traditions. I embraced a daily meditation routine, alternating between Sufi techniques from Islam, mindfulness from Buddhism, and contemplative practices from Christianity. Each offered a unique glimpse into the same spiritual essence I had encountered during my near-death experience. One day, during a particularly profound meditation session, I had a moment that vividly transported me back to my near-death experience. For a fleeting instant, I felt that familiar light and the essence of unconditional love again. Although it wasn't quite as powerful as before, it was a beautiful reminder of what I had once known. The journey I've embarked on has unveiled some profound insights, and it's become clear to me that the truths of existence aren't stashed away in some afterlife, but are right here, just beyond our usual awareness. As I delved deeper, I started to question many teachings I grew up with, realizing that the splits between various religions often stem from historical events and political agendas, rather than genuine spiritual disagreements. I was particularly inspired by the words of the Sufi poet Rumi, who said, "The lamps are different, but the light is the same." This perspective shift wasn't without its trials, though. The more I explored, the more I found myself distancing from the rigid beliefs of my upbringing. This created tension not only within my previous community, but also among friends I had made in the realms of near-death experiences and alternative spirituality. Some of them would say I was overthinking things, trying to fit an extraordinary experience into a rational framework. Others worried that my scientific curiosity might chip away at the profound spiritual nature of those experiences. For me, knowledge and spirituality felt intertwined, like dance partners rather than opposites. Each new layer I uncovered about the brain, consciousness, and the fabric of reality filled me with wonder rather than dispelled the miracles I was encountering. Reflecting one evening, I turned to my journal and wrote, "The search for answers reveals that the real treasures lie in the questions we pose. Every discovery leads us deeper into mystery, and perhaps that's the essence of it all. Not to reach an ultimate truth, but to perpetually grow and explore the endless unknown." Looking back, it became evident that my near-death experience was merely the opening chapter of a broader adventure, one that revolves around understanding the nature of consciousness and humanity itself. This journey is alive, evolving with each book I read, each meditation I engage in, and every conversation I have. Despite all I've learned, perhaps the greatest realization remains. The more insights I gain, the clearer it becomes how much is still out there. In embracing this humility and sustaining an openness to the unknown, I've discovered a richer wisdom. As the years roll by, I continue to navigate this path of spiritual growth and self-discovery. Yet, amidst all the revelations, one question persists at the front of my mind. The ache of being away from my family is something that, even after a while, never fully fades. There are moments that catch me off guard, a certain laugh, the aroma of a dish my mother used to whip up, that leave me feeling emotional. After giving a talk at my university, I received a call from her, and it sparked a flicker of hope in me. Perhaps, with some time and understanding, we could mend our relationship. I was well aware that it wouldn't be easy, though. So, I began to reach out. Just a few emails here and there. At first, I kept them simple. Updates about my life, my studies, and working at the bookstore. I carefully dodged any mentions of my spiritual journey or my public speaking engagements. I wanted to grow our connection carefully, without adding any stress. To my delight, my mom replied. Her messages were short at the beginning, sometimes barely a paragraph, but gradually they grew longer. She filled me in on family gossip and what was happening in her corner of the world. I never directly referred to my father, but now and then I'd drop a comment like, "I bet your dad would be proud of my grades." Then, about 3 years after I had moved out, I got an email that brought tears to my eyes. It began with, "Khalid, my son." She acknowledged our disagreements but assured me that no matter what transpired, I would always be her son, and her love for me was unwavering. Those words were like a soothing balm to my heart. I couldn't write back fast enough, pouring out my feelings and my longing to see her again. To my astonishment, she agreed to meet up. Our first meeting took place at a cafe that wasn't tied to our past, a neutral ground. When I spotted her walking in, my heart raced. She looked different, older, perhaps a bit more worn than I remembered. We embraced tightly, a hug that conveyed everything we hadn't expressed in words. The initial conversation was stilted, filled with awkward pauses and mundane topics, but eventually we began to dive deeper. She shared the pain she had felt after I left, how she spent many nights in tears. That's when she said something that hit me hard. I didn't understand then, and I still don't fully get it, but maybe I don't have to understand everything to love you. Her words resonated with me, making me reflect on my own stubbornness. I realized that maybe love and acceptance could take precedence over complete agreement. From that moment forward, we began to meet more regularly, slowly rebuilding the bond we once had. There were times we would dive into deep conversations about my journey and beliefs, while other moments were simply filled with laughter and nostalgia, sharing happy memories. My father, however, took quite a while to open up. In fact, for almost 2 years after reconnecting with my mother, he wouldn't see me at all. It was my mother who quietly worked in the background, trying to soften his heart. Then came the day of Eid al-Fitr, which celebrates the end of Ramadan. I received a rather brief and formal message from my father inviting me over for dinner. My heart raced and my hands shook as I typed back a yes. Walking into that familiar old house after so long felt surreal. It was a mixture of old memories and unfamiliarity. When I saw my father in the living room, he was stiff, almost as if he were standing at attention. We exchanged a tense handshake that barely masked our emotions. Dinner was a roller coaster of feelings. There were awkward silences that stretched on, but there were also fleeting moments where we reverted to our old family dynamics. My mother did her best to keep us talking, focusing on safe topics like the weather and neighborhood updates. Just as I thought the evening was winding down, my father finally brought up the huge elephant in the room. "Khalid," he said, his voice shaky with repressed feelings, "I still don't understand your choices. I pray for Allah to guide you back to what's right, but you are my son." Then came the words I had hoped for. "I think we've wasted too much time." They weren't an outright approval, but they were more than I had anticipated. It felt like a crack had opened for us to truly communicate. The months that followed were a journey to rebuild my relationship with my family. It wasn't always smooth sailing. There were intense debates and frustration flaring up on both ends. But sprinkled in were moments of joy, laughter, and cherished memories. Gradually, I found myself receiving invitations to family events. Cousins who had previously been discouraged from speaking with me approached me with curiosity about my path. Some were openly confrontational, while others were genuinely interested in what I had to say. One day, at a large family gathering, my younger cousin Ahmed pulled me aside. "Khalid," he whispered, "I have my own doubts about our faith, but I'm scared to voice them. How did you muster the courage?" His words struck a chord, reminding me of the importance of keeping those lines of communication open. It wasn't about converting anyone. Rather, it was about creating a safe space for exploring doubts and asking questions without fear. Through this process, I began to see that reconciliation was possible. It wasn't that we all had the same viewpoint. Rather, it was about making room for our differences and learning to appreciate and respect each other despite them. Years after we reconnected, I had a heartfelt conversation with my father that I'll always remember. He shared, "Khalid, I firmly believe that Islam is the true path, but I've witnessed your growth. You've become a person filled with compassion and thoughtfulness. maybe there are greater plans at work that we don't fully grasp. His remarks highlighted how far we had both come, not just as individuals, but in our father-son relationship. While it didn't signify total acceptance, it reflected an understanding of the importance of my personal journey. Rebuilding ties with my family and community is a continuous effort. There are certainly tough days filled with misunderstandings and frustrations, but on the flip side, there's immense gratitude for the opportunity we have to reconnect. Through my experiences, I've learned that authentic love goes beyond differences in beliefs and perspectives. At times, the bravest and most spiritual thing we can do is to reach out over the gaps that divide us and say, I might not fully comprehend you, but I respect and love you. This whole reconciliation journey has taught me that true spirituality doesn't push us apart. Instead, it forges deeper, more meaningful connections among us. And for that, I am forever thankful.